Today's guest is Olly Richards. Olly is the founder of I Will Teach You a Language.com, which helps you, as the name suggests, to learn languages better and easier. He's also an author, a teacher, and he speaks 8 languages himself, which is pretty impressive. So we're going to delve today into the topic which I personally really love, which is language learning. I'm personally planning to study a new language this year, French. So I'm really excited kind of talking about the topic. So welcome to the show, Olly.
Thanks, man. It's great to be here. Good to be talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. I think maybe we could start, maybe you could share more about yourself and kind of maybe what led you in general to start being interested in learning languages.
Yeah, so hi everybody. My name is Olly. I'm from the UK. I'm one of those people. I never liked languages when I was growing up. I did a couple of languages at school, but wasn't very interested. Didn't pay much attention. I started learning languages when I was 19, and I think the thing that sparked my interest was basically that I moved from Cambridge, which is quite a small town, to London. And in London then I was kind of introduced to the big wide world. I was surrounded by people from all different countries. I mean, I don't know if you've been to London, but
I've been many times. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what it's like, right? So you have everything from like Japanese to Saudi to Israeli to Turkish to you have everything you can imagine. And so I was surrounded by people from different countries, and I kind of I just got the bug. I started to feel a bit. I started to feel self-conscious that everybody had to speak English for my benefit, and that I couldn't communicate with them in their languages. So I started to think to myself, what if I could learn French? That would be cool. Then I could go to France and speak French and live the dream and stuff. I was 19, so it was all quite romantic at that point. And so I started learning, and then I started taking trips abroad. I went to live in Paris for 6 months, and worked hard on my French. And I was good at it. I realized that I could do it. I learned the language, and then I came back to London and I got interested in other languages. So I started learning Spanish and Portuguese. Had lots of friends from those countries in London, which was really important because it meant I got lots of practice speaking. And then I spent some time in South America. So I lived in Brazil, lived in Argentina, and then I kind of changed careers and I went off to live in Japan for 3.5 years. And then I lived in Qatar in the Middle East, and then in Egypt, and then came back to London and kind of picked up languages along the way. But it all kind of stemmed from right when I first learned French back when I was 19, that kind of gave me the confidence to say, right, if I want to learn another language, I can. And as maybe we'll get into in the chat today, like confidence is such an important thing, because when you've got the confidence to learn something, nobody can stop you doing it.
And what made you jump into learning the second language after you learned French? Because I think many people, I think you'll find they speak 1 or 2 languages, but they don't really go on and study like 3rd, 4th, 5th.
Yeah, I think I was just really interested, I mean, I think, so I was living in Paris, and it wasn't that long. I was only there for 6 months, but I could already speak French by that point. And I remember I was working in a youth hostel, doing the night shifts in this youth hostel. And the thing is, I think what you got to understand is, like, for an English guy who just discovers Europe, there's a lot there, like it's not just France, but next to France, you've got Italy, Spain, and Germany, and all these other places, and they've all got their own kind of subcultures and stuff like that. So it was only natural, I think, that I started to, meet people from these different European countries, and then to have the desire to learn their language as well. It's always, language learning for me has always been driven by the people that I've met. It's not because I have a particular love for learning, actually. I always sort of feel that I don't particularly enjoy the study process, actually. What I really enjoy is the communication.
The end goal, yeah.
The end goal, the ability to be able to speak to people, and that's what I really like. So I think that's what spurred me on. It's like when I went from French to Italian, what was spurring me on was, okay, I want to be able to speak with these Italian people. And now I'm going to do what it takes to get there.
Interesting. And being in actual countries, you think helped you study languages? Because you mentioned you've been in Europe and sometimes South America. Physically spending time there was one of the reasons you think you were able to pick up more languages?
Yeah, it's an important question, this. And I think in my case, the answer has to be yes, but it wasn't just that. So my line on this in general is that when you're first starting to learn a language, it's actually better not to go to the country.
Really? Why?
Because when you're a beginner, you can't say anything, you can't have a conversation, you can't understand what people are saying back to you. So actually being in the country and just throwing yourself into these different situations is not a very helpful thing to do. Now, you can survive it, you can get through it, you can make yourself understood and get stuff, but it's a very kind of fractious experience. And the real advantage, the real benefit to being in a country is actually when you can already have a conversation, you can already hold down, you can already communicate with people, because then you can really have meaningful conversations with people, and that's when you can really learn a lot more. If you're still at the beginner stages and you're just trying to wrap your head around the language, then actually you can do that perfectly well from home, and it's faster that way because you can just study by yourself in an environment that you're comfortable with. So in general, I'd say to people, get to a kind of an intermediate level first, then go to the country, because then you're going to be able to actually enjoy interacting with the people that you meet. And so for example, when I learned Spanish and Portuguese, I did that, and Italian actually, I did that from London. So I was kind of learning here, where I had a textbook, but then I also met Spanish people and Brazilians, and we did language exchanges here in London. So I'd meet up with them, and we'd spend an hour speaking English and an hour speaking Portuguese, and that was how I kind of got my chops together. So I kind of got my shit together with the language. And if I had gone to Spain and let's say I'd gone to live in Spain to learn Spanish, actually, I don't think I would have enjoyed it, because I would have been on my own. I would have been in an unfamiliar environment, and I didn't have any money. People don't want to talk to you in general. People don't exist to help you learn the language, So
Yeah, sure.
actually, you're putting yourself in a different environment, an unfamiliar environment. It's kind of better to just be at home, meet people strategically to help you practice the language. And then it's much faster to do it that way. Much faster, less stressful, more comfortable, and just more efficient. So like for me, it did help to go to other countries, but I was already at a good level by that point. So going to the countries, I think, helped me go from intermediate level to advanced level.
So just from intermediate to fluent, where you own and control the language, basically.
That's really where the benefit of being abroad is, yeah, because then you can really talk to people and get exposure at length. You can understand what you hear in the street. You can ask for what you want. You can actually have a life there,
Interesting. So maybe it's a good place to ask, like, what is the starting point? Like, how do you get to the intermediate level? And actually, you can take me as an example. I have a real goal actually this year to study French. I'm going to be in France in July and August. And I don't know if I can do it, but my goal is to be fluent in French after 2 months of spending time in France. So maybe you can take me an example, for example, like, where do you start? Right now, I was in France in the past, but I can't really speak any sentences. I forgot everything. Like, where do people start from scratch, and where can I start from my situation?
Yeah, well, I mean, to start with, you can't be fluent in 2 months. Mm-hmm. But you can learn a lot, for sure. I mean, and it does depend how you define fluency to a certain extent, I think the way that I would break this down is, first of all, you've got to get some basic knowledge together. Okay, so you've got to learn important words, important vocabulary, important grammar, important sentence structure, important pronunciation. You've got to learn the basics of all these things, right? But you
of
can
every
learn,
language.
yeah, and I think the best place to learn all of that stuff is actually kind of by yourself with a textbook that you can work through in your own time, because all the information in a textbook or a course, it's laid out for you and it's been arranged. So, as someone who's, into learning and fast learning and things like that, actually, all you really want is the information presented to you in a clear, systematic way. because then you can choose how you study that, and you can choose how you revise it and review it, and how you get it into your brain. That's quite a quick process. So certainly something that I used to do is that I would just kind of buy a beginner's textbook, like a Teach Yourself French textbook or something, and just work through it quickly from beginning to end. Because what that does is it gives you the basic knowledge, and it puts it on the map for you. So you just know you're by the time you've got through to the end, you know the landscape of the language. You know the things that you need to look out for. You have a general idea of what the language is like. The important thing is not to spend too long doing that. So don't spend months going through that textbook. Like, just go through it fairly quickly. How long do you think? In a few weeks, I think is okay. 3 to 4 weeks. I wouldn't stop and do all of the little exercises and the activities. Forget that stuff. Just go through, read the dialogues, look at the grammar points, look at some of the vocabulary. Just try to get an overall picture of the language, because your brain will pick stuff up naturally anyway, right? Without you having to study it. So what this is just getting the basics of the language into your brain, so you have a kind of basic working knowledge. Then, if you're going to go to France, then the main advantage of being in France is that you can talk to people, right?
Yes.
Because if you're just going to sit and study, then you may as well stay at home. So
Makes sense, yeah.
So really, the challenge is, when you go there, how do you create an environment where you can speak all the time? And that's the difficult thing, because French people, the same goes for any country. People don't want to sit and help you practice French. They're not there for your benefit. You're the one who's going there to learn French.
Yeah, you want to learn from them.
You want to learn from them. So you've got to give them a reason to talk to you. And so, I've got a good friend actually, who went to live in, where was it? Is it Nice? I think it was Nice. He was living in Nice recently for like 6 weeks over the summer. I think it was last year. And she was talking very much like you. She was saying, "Oh, I'm going to spend my kind of dream summer on the beach in France, and to speak French all the time." She came back and she hardly spoke a word of French when she was there, because when you get there, what do? You want to do things that you enjoy, right? You want to meet people, go out and do cool things. And so the temptation generally to drift into other English speaking circles is too high. A lot of the events there that you're going to go to are going to be in English. Even in France, this is going to be true. And you've got to have if you're going to go to French events, you've got to have the balls to turn up somewhere where you don't understand, where the people are going to talk to you and you're not going to understand them. Like, that takes some guts. And if you're the kind of person that can do that, then that's great. I've met people before who can just go to a foreign country. They can just put themselves in difficult situations all day long, and they will just love it. I can't do that. I'm not that kind of person.
Really? So you're not doing it when you're in the countries, or it's a struggle?
Well, I know I am, but I can already speak by that point, right? That's the thing. When you're going there as a beginner,
coming from intermediate and
exactly. So that's the challenge. If you're going there very soon and you're still a beginner, the challenge is, how do you get that practice? So
are you aware of strategies which help you, maybe like once someone in a country, to involve yourself with local speaking people?
Yeah. So what I would do is do a lot of research beforehand. So figure out, the questions to ask yourself are, what kind of things are you interested in, right? So if you're interested in yoga, for example, go and find out every single yoga class that's going on in this. Whereabouts are you going in France?
Probably next to Montpellier, but it's not 100% sure. So probably south of the country, like where I'm going to be.
Okay, so if you're going to Montpellier, for example, then find every single yoga class in Montpellier. Find out where if there are any entrepreneurial groups or any meetups. Go onto meetup.com, Facebook. That's basically just find every single thing going on that sounds cool, that is aligned with your interests, and do that in advance, and kind of just start to fill out your diary with that stuff. You could message the organizers, let them know, introduce yourself, saying that you're coming from Israel, you'd like to attend. So it gives you a bit of commitment so that it's easier for you to go.
Accountability.
A bit of accountability. Yeah, so you can go later. The other thing you can do is try to one thing I would definitely do actually is try to find a local teacher or a local tutor. So find somebody who you can take lessons with while you're there, because then you've got a contact point, right? So then you can take lessons while you're there, even if it's like an hour a day or something, doesn't matter. That person can then recommend you places to go, introduce you to friends, and things like that. I would recommend filling your schedule with stuff in advance so that you don't risk falling into the trap of joining English speaking things once you get there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I did find a teacher is very valuable. That's how I learned Spanish when I spent time in Central America. How do you think it's valuable to have a teacher, and how do you choose the right one? Because I think in my head, like, good teachers and bad teachers. With some you can learn quicker, with some you can learn slower. Do you think there's something like this, and are more valuable?
Yeah.
And if yes, how you go from them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing is you shouldn't rely on the teacher to learn, right? You have to rely on yourself to learn. So the way that you're going to learn French is by spending lots of time with the language outside class. Yes, by reading, by listening, by studying, by going to events, by doing language exchanges. That's how you're going to learn to speak French, right? So then the teacher, I think, is best used for feedback. So, they can listen to you speaking and they can help correct you. They can just be some intense conversation practice, that kind of thing. I think it's a mistake to look to the teacher for your learning, because then you're just at the mercy of that teacher. You do whatever they say. So, I mean, that, in a way, I think that having a teacher locally in the place that you go is more of a strategic thing than anything. It's like saying, so you recognize the benefit of having a real person there who you can meet, and then maybe you arrange your lessons in the morning, so that makes you get out of bed and actually turn up and start the day early. And it's almost the kind of structure that it can bring to you, makes it feel more like real life when you're there. But I think that's really, for me, similar benefits. When I lived in Argentina, I had a teacher, Luciana, who was brilliant. I had 3 hours of Spanish lessons with her every morning, but she became a really good friend. So we'd go out for dinner, and she'd introduce me to her friends after that, and it became like an entry point into life in Buenos Aires. And so that's really how I think I would see the benefit of that. Because again, if you're just there for a couple of months, you're not going to learn that much from a teacher in that time. So the big thing, I think, is how can you get yourself into the local life as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you can do it without a teacher, learning a language quickly by yourself, without anyone, like having this like one-on-one coach?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you need a teacher at all, really. But
you usually don't use teachers for the language.
I mean, it depends. I actually use teachers more.
Not for the purpose of learning, but for the other purposes.
Yeah, it's for speaking practice more. I did a project last year when I learned Italian in 3 months. So this might be a good reference point for you, actually, because it was a 90-day project, and I learned Italian here in London, and I documented everything. So I created weekly videos showing how I'd been studying, what I was doing, everything. So have a look at that, because that's my complete answer of how to do this stuff. But I did it basically without lessons. So I did do a lot of speaking. So I did have tutors and teachers that I used, but it was for speaking practice, not really for lessons. So the teacher is not there lecturing me about grammar or anything like that. It was just, we would talk, and they would give me feedback, and he'd say, oh, how you said ho andato, you should say sono andato. And so they would give me feedback on those things. And because I like to speak, I prefer to speak, and you can get a lot of feedback in an hour of speaking. But I guess where I'm looking to for my learning is not from lessons as such in the traditional sense. It's like I try and say something, I make a mistake, and I get feedback. That's where the learning exists for me.
Okay, so where do you go for the learning? If the teacher, if I'm hearing it right, is the right teacher for speaking, for getting this like speaking practice, but maybe not the one for grammar, reading, and other parts of a language, where do you go for the core learning? And maybe where do you go for the basics as well? If right now, for example, in my case, where would I go? Like ever better places to go, worse, better strategies to use?
Yeah, well, so I mean, when I did this Italian project, I mean, my basic strategy. I mean, I was trying a completely new strategy, so it was, you know, it was quite out there actually. I mean, my whole strategy, my whole question for the challenge was, can I learn just through immersion? So, can I learn a language just through listening and reading? And so, for the whole first month of the project, all I did was listen and read to Italian. That's all I did. And so I didn't, no textbooks, no lessons, no grammar, nothing, just listening and reading. And
Anything specific or just random?
no, so beginner material. So you saw some material. I mean, I'm a big fan of stories. I've published books of short stories. We have a short story book in French, for example. So you could maybe start with something like that. And then you start to just listen and read every single day. And the important thing is you're not, like many of us have, the challenge for us is to reprogram our brains, because we're used to studying stuff in the traditional sense. You know, here's a grammar point. Let's learn the grammar point. Let's practice it. But your brain is capable of absorbing so much information naturally. You just have to give it the chance. So what I found was that just by doing lots of reading and listening, my brain would start to notice patterns. And I mean, of course, I would look up some words in the dictionary, and I would every now and again I would check something in a grammar book. But I'm not memorizing anything. I'm not looking up rules. I'm reading and listening, and then I'm kind of looking up information when I really want to know it. You know, when I'm really curious. What's that word there? I've seen that word 20 times now. What is it? And I look it up, and then just by reading and listening every day, your brain just gets so much exposure to the language that it starts to learn by itself. But I think, I think though, like for many people, especially if they're new to language learning, I think I would recommend still having a textbook and just going through it from, you know, cover to cover, just because it's a bit more concrete, you know, than what I did.
Mm-hmm. And where do you go for the basics? Just really Google, I don't know, French basic textbook?
No, I wouldn't. Right, yeah. So I wouldn't use I steer clear of the internet. I think the internet is terrible for this. Not because there isn't good information there. You can find anything on the internet. The problem is, I think for language learning, you've got to be focused. And so for me, that means turning off the internet, throwing away your phone, sitting with your material, and just being as focused and immersed as you possibly can. I really feel that like things like social media and any internet connectivity is just really, really damaging, because it robs you of your power of focus and attention. So literally go old school, go really old school. Take your textbook and just sit with your textbook and a notebook and a pen and do it like that, old school. That's the way, so that your brain is completely focused on it.
Uh-huh. Do you think being focused while learning accelerates the actual learning?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I think it's the single most important thing you have to do. Mm-hmm. That's why I never recommend apps. I think there are some interesting language learning apps out there.
Oh, because when you're stuck on your phone and you may see notification, go to social media and stuff like this?
Yeah, it's just the potential to get distracted and to look for short-term instant gratification is just, it's not right. It's not how we learn. You know, we learn by going in depth in a focused way onto something. So, you know, it's all the words on the page. It's all you need.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And what are some other ways you can maybe expose yourself to language? Because you said one of the key things is to expose yourself in general to that language. In my case, it would be French.
Yeah. So the thing to do, so there's different kinds of exposure, right? And what most people do is they will go and watch movies They'll try to watch YouTube, maybe listen to podcasts or something like that. And it's good to have that's something that, you know, you can do that in the background if you want, just to kind of get extra time listening to French. But in general, you want to follow a strategy which is known as comprehensible input.
What does that mean?
Comprehensible input. So what that means is that you're getting input from reading or listening at a level that's comprehensible to you, which means you can understand what's going on. You can follow what's going on. Now, imagine as a beginner in French, if I put on a movie in French for you, how much are you going to understand?
Not much, probably.
Not much, exactly. It's it's incomprehensible. Okay, there's a classic example of something that's incomprehensible, and because you can't understand it, it's very difficult to learn anything from it. It's too much going on. You know, it's like if I gave you a brief history of time, you know, the Stephen Hawking book, when you were sort of eight-year-old learning about gravity for the first. I mean, it's just too much. It's too much. It's too advanced, right? So instead of going and watching the movies and things like that, you want to get material that is comprehensible, which means it's at your level or just above your level. So, for example, the books of short stories that I've written, it's called Short Stories in French for Beginners, it's called. I've written those short stories specifically to be at a level that you can understand when you're still getting started.
Beginner's level?
So, yeah. So, I mean, in language terms, it's about A2 on the Common European Framework, which means like a kind of high beginner type level. So what that means is, as a beginner, you can kind of sit down and start to read these stories, and okay, it's going to be difficult, but the level is not that high, so you can actually follow what's going on. So it means it's comprehensible. So this for you is comprehensible input. So you want to try and get that through reading and listening. So you want to find material that is suitable for a beginner level that you can read and listen to. And that means that as you're spending that time with the language, it's not too hard. So your brain can start to spot patterns, notice things without getting too tired, without getting too overwhelmed. And so you want to look for stuff that's at that level.
Something that would just stretch you a bit. And when you understand it and you raise your level, I don't know, from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, you go another level and find something which will challenge you.
Exactly. And so as you improve, you're constantly finding stuff that's slightly above your level, because there's a direct correlation between how much you can understand and how much you can learn from that material.
But you're saying the key is not to challenge you too much, just to make sure the challenge is sufficient for you to enjoy, learn it, and kind of get going.
Exactly. So whatever you're reading or listening to, you should be able to follow the gist. You should be able to follow the basic idea of what they're saying. If you can't follow anything, it's too hard for you. So then you need to make it slightly easier. Look for stuff where you can understand and follow along, and then just spend all of your time reading and listening to that. And you'll be amazed what your brain can do when you just spend that time immersed in the language.
How many hours a day do you think I should spend it? And we can take maybe my case, as you said, like have a 90-day project maybe. It's pretty intense, and I want to get to a higher level as quickly as possible. What do you think is a good amount to spend?
Well, if you've got time to dedicate to it, I would say
time,
assuming you have enough time, then I'd be looking to spend about 3 hours a day on listening and reading. Mm-hmm. That's what I did last year with Italian, and I think it's good. Any more than that, you're going to get too tired, I think.
The rest of the time should be on other parts of the language.
Well,
like speaking.
So I know people who can study languages for 8 hours a day. I can't do that. I've got.
I don't think I can as well.
No, I've got between 1 to 3 hours maximum on a very good day. So what I would do in my project was basically say, okay, my mornings are for Italian, so I'm going to read and listen. So I might spend an hour reading, and then I might go to the gym for an hour and listen in the gym for an hour, and then come back and then do another hour of reading, something like that. And I just aim to get like 2 to 3 hours a day of input. And if you can do that every day, the real results, they come not from one day to the next, but from 1 week to the next, as all that time starts to kind of balloon into this huge amount of time that you've spent. And, you know, you might find that you might go for a whole week and you feel like you've learned nothing. But then at the end of the second week, suddenly everything comes together because you're just getting so much exposure that your brain just starts to soak it up like a sponge.
Interesting. I'm a big believer in the 20-80 Pareto principle.
Yeah.
And if you heard, I'm curious if you think there are like 20-80 in language learning. It can be specific to French. Like, what is the 20% which one can do to really get 80% of the results?
Yeah. So there's a few ways of looking at this. I mean, the simple answer is to say that, okay, so there are probably in French 100 or 150 words which account for 50% of all French, because every language is every language is a bit like this. You know, it's called a frequency list, right? So you can find that frequency list, and you can find out the most frequent 100 to 200 words, and you could sit down and memorize those. I think that's valid. I think you could do that. The trouble is that if you're doing, this is something that my friend Steve Kaufman says a lot. If you're doing a lot of listening and reading, you're going to learn those words anyway because they're so frequent. Mm-hmm. You know, so think about in English, what would those words be? I, you, he, she, in, go, want. You know, these kind of super common words. For someone who's just starting learning English, there isn't really much point memorizing those words because you're going to learn them so quickly anyway. So you may as well spend that time just in it with immersion, and then you'll learn those words anyway. So then I think once you get out of those very, very high frequency words, then the utility of the next words in the frequency list starts to drop quite quickly because, you know, you can talk about all kinds of different things. So I think in terms of language content, I don't think that the 80-20 principle is really that useful. I think where the 80-20 principle really is useful is when you look at it through the lens of how am I spending my time and on what activities. So for example, if you look at, let's take a standard textbook as an example. In a standard textbook, okay, what do you have? You have, you know, in one module, you might have a dialogue at the beginning of the textbook. Then you might have a list of words from the dialogue. Then you might have a grammar lesson. And then 2 pages of exercises. And then a pronunciation guide at the end. That might be what you see in one chapter of a language textbook. Now, if the question was, okay, inside one of those chapters, what is the 80-20 of how I can use my time with that? The answer is the dialogue. That's it. That's
why the dialogue?
Because everything else that you need to know, you can find within that dialogue. The word lists, the grammar lesson, the exercises, all of that stuff, you will find it inside the dialogue because it's already there. But the beauty of that is that you're seeing the whole language there. So you're seeing all the context. You're hearing people speaking, you're reading the words, you're seeing everything used together. So if you spend all of your time, I think if all that you did with the textbook was to go through every chapter and you just read and listened to the dialogues over and over and over again, and then you ignored everything else, I think that's your 80-20. You've got most of the results.
Interesting. So you would not recommend me, in my case, for example, to go and learn those 150 or 400 words? Because I heard actually, like as someone I read, it's a 20-80 in the beginning, like to learn these common words.
Yeah.
You would say just go and do reading, listening, basically, and you'll get those words anyway through this.
Well, not only will you get those words, but you'll know how to use them. Because, you know, in a language like French, you've got lots of sort of sentence patterns that you can learn. Words always exist in context. So let's take some really common French word like et or ce or ne. Like these are all extremely common words, but it doesn't do you any good to know that word without knowing the context.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have a sentence like est-ce que je peux, can I, may I, or n'est-ce pas, is that not true? Like those are, you have to know that as a phrase. So est-ce que je peux, est-ce que je peux. There's 5 words in that.
Mm-hmm.
In that sentence, est-ce que je peux, can I, and it's a funny word order because the verb comes at the beginning, and then it's really weird. If you'd learnt any of those words individually from a list of words, from a frequency list, you wouldn't know what to do with it. You'd have a kind of a rough English translation, but it would help you. It would be of zero use when you actually come to speak. So the kind of higher level concept here is that context is everything. All the kind of words exist in context. So if you want to actually be able to speak, it's much better to spend your time immersed in the language, so that, okay, it might be a little bit slower, but when you learn something, you really know how to use it. And that's what counts when it comes to speaking a language, because speaking a language is not just combining one word after the other. It's not throwing together different formulas like it is in, say, maths or something like that, or coding. Like a language is a very organic thing with lots of subtleties, lots of conventions, lots of kind of nuance and hidden meanings. And so the only way you can learn that stuff is through actually surrounding yourself with the language.
Interesting. Do you do anything recommending specifically for pronunciation? I know, for example, French, even though it's similar for Spanish, which I know has a very different intonation, pronunciation. And I know I saw you studied Cantonese, so I can only imagine that's another world of pronunciation. So what do you do about this element of language learning?
Good question. Pronunciation is one of the few things that I think you absolutely should learn well from the beginning. So because basically with pronunciation, it's much easier to learn it correctly at the beginning than it is to unlearn bad pronunciation later. Yeah. And also with French, like French is a difficult language for pronunciation. French pronunciation is tricky. So I think that actually, one very good use of a teacher at the beginning would be to help you with your pronunciation.
Mm-hmm. So
I would definitely recommend having
work on this.
Yeah, I think that would be a very good thing to do. Just hire a teacher and say, look, I want to just get my pronunciation right from the beginning, and have him or her help you do that. I think that would be very good. It depends on your ear though, because I think if you're spending a lot of time doing the stuff I'm suggesting, so particularly listening,
mm-hmm.
you're going to pick up a lot of good pronunciation anyway. The mistake that a lot of people make, I think, is that they don't spend enough time listening. And when it comes to pronunciation, the most important thing is that you have to be able to recognize before you can produce. So you can't pronounce it correctly unless you can already notice and hear the pronunciation. So already by doing lots of listening, you're going to be in a good spot. So that will definitely help you. If you have a good ear in general, you'll probably be able to pick it up by yourself. That's what I tend to do. I mean, I have a background in music, so I have a fairly strong ear. So pronunciation for me is not usually a problem. But I recognize that for other people, that's not necessarily the case. So I think, it would be really good to have help from a teacher with pronunciation at the beginning, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Where do they get the stuff to listen? I know you keep mentioning that it's really important to get it. So where would they go, for example, and actually get the right audios to listen?
Yeah, so your local library probably has a lot of French textbooks, which usually come with CDs. If you still have a CD player, I don't have a CD player anymore, but sometimes you can get it. Yeah, or you can get it. They can have the audio online. But actually, your local library, and then certainly here in London, if you go into your library, they have tons of beginner French textbooks. So you can you can get the audio from those. And at the beginning, you can just start going through all the simple dialogues and audios from the textbooks. That's a really good place to start. You can also find, there are online resources. So there are French beginner podcasts, for example, that you can listen to. I mean, I'm not so familiar with French resources, so I'm not sure. But if you find Learn French podcasts and look for beginner content, then you'll be able to find things there. I mean, we're just actually producing next week. In fact, we're releasing a French course for beginners. It's a story-based French course, because one of the most common problems is what you just mentioned. Actually, where do I find the material to do this? So in our beginner courses, actually at the center of all of our courses is a story. So it's all story-based. And so what you do in this course before you get to the lessons is you spend time listening and reading to the story. So we kind of provide you the story with the text and with the audio, and we give you all of that kind of that content there to learn from, to listen and read, because it can be difficult to find it, right? So we want to kind of give you everything in one place so that you don't have to go out and search for it and waste time looking for material. You can just kind of get on with it. But if when you look around at different beginner resources out there, podcasts, courses, books, there's quite a lot. But you do have to kind of go out and spend a day, getting material together.
Researching, got it.
Researching, yeah.
What do you mean by story-based? Can you elaborate more on this? Like, what exactly does it mean when you teach through story-based?
Yeah, so good question. So earlier I was talking about how my basic approach to learning is lots of listening and reading.
Correct.
Right? Because when you are immersed in the language at your level, that's when your brain can learn automatically. So then the next question is, okay, well, what do I read and listen to? And my answer for that is stories. Because stories are the way that we all communicate. It's the foundation of communication. We all have our favorite books, our favorite movies. Stories is at the heart of everything that we do.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So the way that I teach is using stories, because it's the best way to get to present language. There are lots of other ways to do it too. You can have newspaper articles and things like that. You can have blog posts, but for me, stories there's something that everybody can understand. And so for example, in our beginners courses, we have a story that is written for beginners. So it's at the right level, and it comes in 20 parts. So it's quite long, 20 short chapters. And then the whole course is actually organized around the chapters of that story. So in module 1 of the course, you'll read that chapter of the book, you'll listen to it, and then we have lessons that teach you the language by looking at that chapter of the book. So we'll kind of help you uncover the grammar and the vocabulary and the things like that from the story. So we're kind of taking that approach of, instead of a regular textbook where they say, okay, here are the grammar rules, learn the grammar rules, and memorize the vocabulary, we do the opposite. We say, okay, here is the language in a story. Go away and spend some time with that, and then I'll come in and teach you the language from the words in the story. So it's very, very natural, very, very organic way of doing it. And it has listening and reading right at the center.
Got it. So at which level I do it? Like if I want to start from beginning, I go to the stories right away, or do you have?
Yeah, no, from the beginning. Yeah. So these are beginners courses. So right from the beginning, we have you listening and reading. And the reason is I don't want you to get any kind of false sense of, kind of Duolingo style pressing buttons and flashing lights. None of that nonsense. We want to.
You don't like Duolingo?
No, because it gives. I mean, it's a fun app, but it gives you the wrong sense of what it is to learn the language. So you don't
think someone can learn a language for Duolingo, or at least get to this level?
No way.
Mm-hmm.
You can learn vocabulary. Yeah, you can learn some stuff, but that's not the language. The language is not. It's not.
Not
little,
actual speaking like in real
yeah,
life.
there's no context there. And Duolingo gives you unusual sentences, like the owl sat on my ice cream and stuff like that. I don't know what you like. It's just it's not real. It's not real. I understand that it's motivating, that people enjoy it, that it's fun, but it's not.
Yeah, they gamified it. Yeah.
It's all gamified. It's the opposite of what we want, which is deep focus. So that's why even in our beginners courses, and we have these in Spanish, French, Italian, German, Japanese, right from the beginning, we don't try to give you a false impression of what it's like. You are listening and reading from day one, right from the beginning, and that's why that's why by the time you finish these programs, you're kind of you really know the language because you've been spending all of your time actually immersed in the language. You know, it's the most direct possible way to kind of get your to get a level of proficiency in it, because it's impossible to spend that much time and not learn. It's impossible. But obviously, you know, to make it easier, the stories that we have are not, you know, you're not reading War and Peace from the beginning. You know, these are simple stories that are written for beginners, so that you can actually you can use it, you can read it, you can understand it, you can follow the gist, which is the main thing.
Once you're not a beginner and maybe you're an intermediate, you also go and learn from stories, or you change your strategy? Or like stories is the way of delving into listening and reading in a good way based on the level you are.
Yeah, well, I think so at the intermediate level, that's the time when you want to start to shift towards native level content. Right. So once you're at an intermediate stage, so the Italian project I was telling you about that I did last year, by the third month, I was already listening to Italian podcasts, watching Italian movies, reading Italian books. I was doing all of that stuff. But that was
Were you
quite
understanding it in a fluent way already?
Yeah. But that was quite quick for me because I've learned other languages before. I already speak French and Spanish, so I did have a bit of a head start, you know. But the point is that there comes a point where you have to stop sort of studying, in inverted commas, and actually start to just live the language, much like I'm sure you did with English. You know, there comes a point where you're just working in English, you're reading in English, you're talking to people in English, you know, and that's when you really start to become strong and like at a native level, you know, like you've got to, you know, you don't get you don't get to your level in English by studying. You get to it by living the language. So you need to make that shift at some point. And the question is, when do you make that shift? And I think it's different for everybody. You know, at the intermediate level, you've still got quite a bit of work to do, actually. I think actually the easiest bit with language learning is to get to an intermediate level. I think that's the easy bit. It gets much harder after that because you've just got so much more to learn about so many different topics.
How long does it take to get to intermediate, you think?
To get to intermediate, I mean, I think depending on the language, if you already speak English and you're learning a Romance language like French, I think you can get there in a few months for sure if you work hard. But it could take you 6 months, 12 months if you work less hard. It depends how much work you put in.
That makes sense, yeah.
But if you're doing what we talked about earlier, you're doing 2 to 3 hours a day, then you can definitely be at an intermediate level in a few months for sure. But only if you spend enough time actually reading and listening. If all you're doing is kind of Duolingo and memorizing word lists and studying grammar, you won't be there because you might have a lot of knowledge, but you won't know how to use it. And you've got to know how to use it, and that's why it's so important to be reading and listening as much as possible, so that you learn from the real thing.
And if you don't go to the country, and let's say I want to learn a new language, and I don't go to France, for example, do you think I can pick up and speak good just from listening and reading, or there are different things you should do in such a case?
So this is exactly what I did with Italian last year. So I didn't go to Italy. I only went to Italy at the end of the project. What you need to do is to start speaking. And you can do that a number of ways. The most convenient way is to use a speaking platform like italki is a great website where you can find native speaker speaking.
What's the website?
It's called italki, italki.
I'll put it in the show notes for people who are listening as well.
italki.com. And basically, it's like a marketplace for teachers. So you can find teachers and then you take lessons on Skype. But the cool thing is that, a lot of you can find teachers there who are called informal tutors. And what that is it's not a professional teacher, but it's just a guy or a girl from that country, and you pay them, say, $10 an hour, and you have an hour of speaking practice. So that's really, really good. And so what I did with Italian was that I had at least an hour every day speaking Italian. And I did it on Skype. And it's exactly the same as, we're talking to each other now on Zoom. We're talking face to face. We're having a great conversation, and you can do this in other languages, and it's a great way to practice. And the cool thing is it's convenient, right? So it's doable. And so, I could challenge you maybe and say, you want to go to, you're going to go to France for 2 months, right?
Yes.
Well, I could say to you, well, how about if you just stayed at home and did 2 hours of Skype sessions every day? Instead
of with a teacher, or it's really the same?
Instead of going to France, like no teacher, just speaking. It's just worth thinking about, because many people would find that they could go to France or travel abroad, and actually you can't get even an hour of real speaking practice every day. Because people don't want to talk to you. People don't want to help you practice, So actually, by staying at home and getting a couple of hours a day of speaking practice, that's way more than you might get abroad. And you don't have to leave your living room, and it only costs $5-10 an hour. So that, I'm a bit critical of apps and the internet in general for language learning, but I think Skype or Zoom or whatever you use to do, to talk to people, is exactly what the internet was made for. We're connecting people around the world over broadband internet, and it's just it's amazing. So that is really one of the secret weapons for learning to speak. Ultimately, if you want to be able to speak fluently, you've got to speak a lot every day. But not at the beginning. Not ever at the beginning. It can come later, but you have to get there at some point.
Are there other secret weapons like italki, which you can share? Anything that comes to mind?
Let me think.
It can be for all different levels. It doesn't have to be beginners. It doesn't have to be intermediate. Anything under the topic of language learning.
I mean, there are tons of websites and resources out there, but I think the interesting question is, like, what's the 80-20 of the activities that you do? And I think, to keeping this really, really simple, I think it's about reading and listening every day to material that is at your level or above. And then consistency. So doing it every day and not missing your study slots. And then it's about starting to speak regularly, again, every day, with someone who can help you practice. Because that's what you can learn a lot of stuff through reading and listening, but then you've got to activate it through speaking. It's a different skill. So we're talking about reading and listening to get the input. We're talking about speaking to practice. And then the next thing, I think, is starting to shift from your learner material, your study material, to actually listening to real content in the language. So watching movies, watching YouTube, listening to podcasts, reading books, things like that, but only when you're ready. And that's the point there, when you can start to understand that, that's the point there where you can actually start to orientate your life around that stuff. So, that's when you can put your phone in French, you can get your news in French, you can go out with French friends and stuff like that. It's towards the later stages, but it's good to know that that's where you're kind of aiming for.
Interesting. Oh man, I wish I had more time to ask you more questions. I know we're running towards the end. One last thing, like, how was it feeling to go to Italy after you studied Italian for 3 months?
So I filmed all of this. It's all on YouTube, actually. So a friend came with me and he filmed. We were walking through Venice, through the canals in Venice, and speaking Italian and stuff like that. And It was great, but the thing was actually that, you know, through Skype and through doing language exchanges and stuff, I had already actually been speaking Italian a lot in London before that. You know, so just like the kind of an 80-20 that I just told you, you know, starting off with lots of listening and reading, I transitioned to speaking, and I was doing a lot of speaking in Italian already in London. So it didn't really feel that different to being in London. It was the same language after all. So it was cool, and I felt very pleased with myself, and it was nice and all that. But yeah, I think really, you know, language learning is something that we need to, I think is best done to integrate into your life and to use in your life wherever you live. And so, you know, these days, I don't really think about language learning as a travel tool, although it helps, you know. I think about language learning as a way to improve my life and to enhance the quality of my life here in London where I live. And I think that's really, for me, it's the point of all of this. You know, it's how I make sense of it all, and it's how I justify the time and the effort and energy that I put into it.
Interesting. I love this answer. Yeah, so we're kind of getting to the end of the show, the time we have today. Olly, where would you want maybe to send people to study, or any kind of URL, or any other place you would want people to visit, where they can find you online?
Sure. So my website is the kind of home of everything. So iwillteachyoualanguage.com. That's quite long, but iwillteachyoualanguage.com. And then we have if you're learning a language, you can go to the menu bar at the top where you can choose your language. And then there you can find all of the various courses that we have for different languages and different levels. So you can see there if there's anything that would be useful for you. You can find me on YouTube as well. I put out videos every week on the topics that we're talking about here, tips for language learning. And then, so just go to YouTube and search for Olly Richards. That's Olly, Olly. And then Instagram as well. If that's your kind of thing, you can find me on Instagram at I Will Teach You a Language, or just search for Olly Richards, and you can find me there.
Sounds cool. I'll link all of those in the show notes as well. Olly, thank you very much for taking the time today and speaking about the subject. It's fascinating. I really love language learning. So thank you for sharing everything you learned.
It's my pleasure, man. Thanks for the invitation to talk.
Sounds good. Take care.
Cheers.
Cheers.